In this video, I'll share with you what I feel is the most valuable photography skill. We will start with some theory and examples, and then go for a walk around Brighton where I can show you this in real life. This video is also sponsored by Squarespace, but more on them later on. Do you remember the early days of Instagram? The biggest and most popular accounts were sharing these out-of-this-world photos, look-downs from Tokyo skyscrapers, drone shots of Iceland, or photos, I don't know, skydiving over some remote mountain range in Patagonia, for instance. Those accounts were huge, those photos got all the likes, and they peppered your Instagram feed maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Today, the landscape, however, I feel is a bit different because those photos don't seem to attract as much attention, at least from me and maybe you as well, as they did back then. Instead, the photos that catch my eye, and equally many other people's eyes, are photos of mundane places, mundane things that you would see every day as you would go about your day. So for example, photos taken in Brighton walking up and down the pier would probably be more popular than photos taken on top of Mount Everest, at least with more people. There are a few reasons for it, I think. The main one being is that photos of everyday life are just simply more relatable compared to photos taken in crazy locations that only a fraction of the population will ever be able to experience. The most valuable photography skill, at least in my opinion, is being able to photograph these mundane objects in everyday places, but in a way that makes them photogenic and makes them look good. There's a reason why photos of nice garages in, I don't know, the west coast of the States are quite popular. There's a reason why photos of a camera and some coffee on the table, as long as it's all looking nice and aesthetic, why that's popular. Because these are everyday things that you can physically do yourself and replicate, and done in such a way that it looks good. One of the biggest levers you can pull is to change your perspective in relation to whatever it is you're taking photos of. Some things look much better if you're looking from top down, other things look better if you look at eye level, and other things might look better if you bring the camera down to the same level as that particular object. I can't remember where this was taken, I think it was in France, and basically I loved the layout of this. However, if I took the photo at eye level, it just wouldn't have worked. If I brought the camera down, it also wouldn't have worked. Here, just shooting almost kind of top down with a slight angle is working. Of course, the light and the composition helps as well, but in this particular case, a more of a look down style shot helps. Moving on to this swimming pool in Dubai, I think it was, and in this particular case, I wanted the focal point to be these very shiny railings, and instead of going further back and trying to get everything in, I stood quite close to the railings and basically pointed the camera down again. And by doing that, it's giving the viewer the impression that they're standing there themselves and that they could walk into the swimming pool if they so wish. By using this particular angle, overall it's giving this image a bit more life compared to if I stood further away and taken a generic shot. And the last example is this guy making a coffee. This was in Bilbao, I believe, and even though I could have taken a normal photo of him making this coffee, instead I came closer and I placed the camera at the same level as the subject, which in this particular case is the coffee cup and the jug with the milk. And this is really putting you, the viewer, into this scene and making you feel like you're standing there and focusing on what he's doing. The next point I feel is even more important, and that is to shoot into the corner. So if you have a room, a space, a table, an object, whatever it is, try your best to shoot it diagonally and into the corner. Because what that does, it creates depth. And if you have good light hitting the subject, then it adds so much more dynamic shadow compared to if you shoot it kind of flat. Don't get me wrong, in some cases, shooting it flat does work, especially if you have strong colors and contrast. But in most cases, especially if there is an intricate 3D object, then shooting it into the corner or at an angle is going to really help you. If we look at this particular cafe in Brighton, by shooting it at an angle, it's creating depth and adding a 3D feel to this room, which is something that's very easy to lose on a 2D image. Here's an example from the ferry in New York, and I am shooting it at an angle into the corner where the window meets the boat. And by shooting it at an angle, it's giving you 3D depth and a feeling that you could be standing there, and making the overall scene more interesting, especially with how the light comes in. And the last example here is of this bench next to a doorway into someone's home. By shooting this at an angle, I'm allowing the shadows from the bench to be visible and giving everything a more three-dimensional look, especially if you look at the cloth that's hanging down from the door. If I took this photo dead on, it would just look a little bit flat, and while the color would help, it just wouldn't have the same impact as taking it at an angle. The next point is composition and minimalism. Of course, composition is important. It's pretty much everything because you're deciding what's in and out of the frame. I've made a bunch of videos on composition, so do check them out. Just search for composition on my channel. However, I would like to emphasize the point of keeping things minimal by paying attention to what you're including in the frame and what you're excluding. Now, in some cases, having a chaotic scene might work, but if you're taking a photo of something that's pretty mundane, you want that subject or that object to be as clearly visible as possible and have a more of a minimal photo. Let me show you some examples. This is a very classic photo. This was taken in Rabat in Malta, and this is literally a window with a cat sitting in it. It's minimal, it works, there are no distractions, there are no different colors going on. You have a simple white wall, a blue window frame, a yellowish windowsill, and a cat that also matches and creates the color contrast. There isn't much going on here, which makes this photo very simple and minimal. This photo of some coffee being made in Tokyo, there was quite a chaotic scene, but I really wanted to get this particular part of the process, and the only way to do that was to really bring the camera extremely close to the subject and cut all of the other stuff out. So the main focus here is the kettle and the coffee, and by removing everything else, it keeps the photo simple and minimal. Therefore, it's easier for you to understand what's going on without hunting around the scene. And the final example is of this little shed and whatever that concrete thing is in Brighton. It's a pretty simple scene. There was a lot going on around it, but I managed to frame it in a way so that only that particular subject is visible, and because it's so simple, it works. It's a mundane object that's not particularly interesting, but it's photographed in a way that makes it a lot more interesting compared to just taking a snapshot and walking away. If you've seen any of my previous videos, by now you'll probably be sick of how many times I mention light, the importance of knowing how to position yourself in relation to the light source and the subject. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I've made a video about light, so do check that out. In this particular case though, the lighting is even more important, because if your subject is not particularly interesting, then you need light to make it as interesting as possible. Because if you have already an interesting, crazy subject, then the other elements, even though they're essential, they might not be as critical in order to kind of make that photo work, because the subject and the story in the photo is what's kind of pulling it through. But in this particular case, the light will really matter. The first example is in Cambridge, and I think it's a fancy restaurant. Basically, you have this light hitting the green door and the bollard, and the reason this photo works is because you have such strong contrast and very pleasing light, giving textures to this particular bollard and really accentuating the door. And by having these shapes and this contrast, it makes the photo pleasing, because believe me, if you were there on a dull, cloudy day, this just looks rubbish. This next example is from Porto, and there was a little pigeon walking around, and there was this kind of nice triangle with the light. It was quite late in the day, you had some beautiful golden light, and I managed to get the pigeon right in the corner. If that light wasn't there, this would not work whatsoever, because you wouldn't see the pigeon because it'll be in the shadow. Everything will be kind of monotone and boring, and this is where good light can really make all the difference. The last example is this intricate window somewhere in Marrakesh, I think. You have this beautiful strong light just flooding in and creating all of these patterns and shapes on the wall, as well as accentuating all the details in this yellow railing. If the light wasn't there, this would not look as interesting because you would not be able to see all of these intricate details. So in this particular case, the light really is carrying this image forward. Next up is color. Look for colorful backgrounds, bright pops of color, or even colorful subjects, because that will attract viewers' attention and that can make a boring object look a bit more interesting. The first example is this house in Portugal, and you have a beautiful orange color to this building, which contrasts nicely with the blue sky. If this building was grey or white or black, this just wouldn't work. The next example is from Portugal, and we have strong orange colors on the bench, and they're contrasting with the bright blue of the wall and sea and sky, of course. If this bench was black or grey or another color, this image just wouldn't pop as much. This is a classic example where a strong color can make a pretty mundane object and scene look a lot more interesting. And the final example is this wall and window. Now you also have a nice texture here that I'll talk about in a minute, but the colors are beautiful. You have a nice color contrast between the window and the wall, and it's a very strong, pleasing color that is carrying this image forward. If these colors were not as strong, or perhaps it was more of a monochrome image, this wouldn't work at all. Next, you want to look for some layering in your photography, and this is where you're adding a foreground subject or something in front of the lens between you and your actual subject. This can create a degree of separation. It can also tidy up the image, but more importantly, it will make your viewer feel that they could be standing there themselves. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. The first example is of this phone right here, and as you can see, I am shooting through the phone box with the subject being the phone. By doing that and making sure I'm shooting at a fast enough aperture to create that blur on the foreground, I'm creating some separation between the subject and myself, therefore making the viewer feel that they could be standing there. This also draws more attention onto the subject and away from all of the distractions around. Here's a very similar example in Tokyo where I wanted to get a photo of a yellow taxi against the grey concrete. However, just a standard photo probably wouldn't work as well because you wouldn't know where I was standing, and in this particular case I shot it through the railings, which created that depth and separation. And the last example is of this guy walking across. However, this photo was taken through one of those clear plastic windows that you get in outdoor dining and created this kind of layer between me and the subject. Of course, there's nice texture plus good colors which really help, but having this separation makes the image a little bit more interesting. And last but not least is texture. Even though I talked about having minimal photos earlier on, if you do come across a very nice and pleasing texture, that can also make the mundane look more interesting. We've already had a few of these examples, but let's look at a couple more. This is a pile of crates in Vietnam, and again, a very dull, uninteresting subject, but when you crop it right in and you focus on the texture and the pattern, this does look quite interesting. The second example is of this roof in Morocco. Again, if I took a wider shot and included a lot more in it, you wouldn't be able to pay attention to the beautiful pattern of the roof. By focusing in on the pattern, you're taking a pretty mundane object, which is a roof, and you're making it a lot more interesting. And the final example are these fishing nets in Croatia. You have wonderful texture here, and it's taking something that's pretty mundane and making it a bit more interesting. Obviously, the color, the composition does help quite a lot, but fundamentally, the texture of this is really good. So I hope these examples have given you a few ideas, and now let's go for a quick walk around Brighton and do some actual photography and show you this in real life. I'd like to take a moment and thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I've been using Squarespace for over 5 years as my online photography portfolio, where I share my best work from all the trips and shoots. Having an online portfolio is important because it's your little corner of the internet that you can arrange however you like. I would also encourage everyone to start an online blog about their photography. Having a blog is the best way for your website to stay relevant on Google because there's fresh content always being uploaded. Not to mention, it's a great way for your website to become more searchable through SEO. Squarespace offers powerful blogging tools that will allow you to publish blogs from anywhere on any device. Squarespace also offers powerful analytics that help you understand where your readers are coming from and what they're searching for. If you're an aspiring photographer, having your own website is important because it will elevate you from everyone else. For a free trial followed by 10% off your first purchase, please use the link in the description or use code RomanFox when you check out. Thank you for Squarespace for sponsoring, and thank you for watching. So here's an example that contains quite a few of the elements. So we have a crappy old telephone covered in graffiti, disgusting, probably doesn't smell too good either. How do I take a photo of this that looks good? Well, so far we've got good light coming in from the side, backlighting or side lighting, sorry, the phone box. Also we're shooting into the corner, so it's creating depth. And because there's so much texture, there's so much going on, it just makes the scene a little bit more interesting. Now I could just shoot at eye level like this, but I don't think it's the best angle. Actually going just literally kind of dead on like this is going to create the best opportunity in this particular case. So I've just come across this little scene. You've got a BMX over there that's being hit by the light quite nicely. You've got a bunch of different shapes and leading lines, which make it a bit more of a geometrical photo, and a nice table tennis there with blues, reds, a bunch of different colors as well. This is a landscape photo, and I'm kind of framing it up like this so everything balances out, and on their own none of these subjects are particularly interesting. However, when you put everything together, this very basic scene just works. Now this could be due to a number of factors such as light, colors, geometry, but overall it's a very pleasing image that I'm quite happy with. Here's an example that involves more color. Specifically, we have the yellow railings, the blue door, and the yellow and red frames with a nice kind of beige wall as well. The photo itself is very basic. It's just composed like this, and the main thing here is the good light, the colors and the textures. The actual subjects or the actual parts of the image are really boring. It's just some railings, a door and a couple of posters on the wall. But because of the colors, because of the light, because of the overall layout, it takes a really boring and dull and uninteresting scene and makes it at least somewhat more interesting. So here's an example of a very random object. There's a couple of little table tennis rackets, I don't know what they're called, lying right here. But what's interesting about this particular scene is you've got the shadow right there. It's like a nice leading line and it matches up there. Also you have a bit of color contrast with the red and the darker kind of blue grayish, plus obviously the shadow and highlight contrast as well. Now you could take a photo kind of just looking like this, but it's not really going to work. Instead, this is more of a top-down shot, like so, and this is where changing that perspective will actually give the image a bit more interest because it's from a perspective that you typically wouldn't see. Now here's an example where the angle can really make a difference. We've got two deck chairs up ahead. If I take a photo of them at this angle, it adds a bit of depth and it makes you feel more like you're kind of standing here, more like it's a 3D scene. Whereas if I just go straight behind them, excuse the noise, and I take the same picture, you'll see it's just not quite the same. So this is a cool little scene. We have this wonderful yellow door, white column, kind of beige wall, black railings, and a checkered staircase. There's a mixture of clean negative space, strong colors, details, and contrast as well. The light's coming from the side, but it's being flat lit. However, we're shooting at an angle. But because the light is hitting it directly, overall it's giving us a very clean look. So because of all of these elements, and we're shooting it at an angle like this, it creates a really nice photo. Here's a really nice scene. You've got the ice cream cone box there with the ice creams being lit up by the sun. It's going through the window, adding some reflections right there. And all I'm going to do is just wait for someone to walk past and create a bit of a silhouette around there. So you'll have a nice bit of framing, you're shooting kind of at an angle, plus a potential subject going through there. And because it's a pretty dull, boring subject, I don't know, come on, focus. It's not focusing, never mind. You get the idea. This should work. Alright, well that is all for this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope it's given you a few ideas to try out yourself. Please let me know down in the comments, what do you think of this concept? Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you have any of your own tips and suggestions on how to make a boring subject or a boring place look interesting, please use the comment section for that so that everyone can learn together. For now, that's it. I am boiling here because the aircon doesn't work, and I need to go out and take some photos and stuff. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I can't reach the camera to do that, so yeah, bye bye.